Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host of the program. I'm also a state senator representing Johnson County in Iowa City. Thanks for being with us. Iowa News and Views is a public affairs program focusing on state and local issues, and we try to present a progressive perspective on those issues, progressive analysis of those issues for our Iowa viewers. We'd like to say hi to West Liberty, our latest city and town that's joined the Iowa News and Views network, now making more than 500,000 Iowa households that see this program. In West Liberty, actually, we're on every day at 6:30. So for you in other places that don't get to see Iowa News and Views every day, you should feel kind of left out. But we are glad you've joined us. We have an interesting program tonight. There's been a lot of debate in the country over the last number of weeks about gun control, and that's our topic this evening, what we should be doing to stem the violence caused by guns in America. Our guest is Dennis Smith. Dennis is the Executive Director of Iowans for the Prevention of Gun Violence, and we appreciate you being with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Joe. I'm glad to be here.
One of the big issues that's been in the press more recently has been what's going on in Congress with debate over whether or not we're going to pass some fairly modest proposals to try and address gun violence. You were out in D.C. Tell us, well, actually, before we go to that, why don't you tell us a little bit about Iowans for the Prevention of Gun Violence?
Well, Iowans for the Prevention of Gun Violence was formed in 1992, actually incorporated in 92, was first organized, though, in 1991, immediately after the campus massacre here at the University of Iowa. It was known back then as the November 1st Coalition in recognition of the date of that massacre. And as we grew over the first several years, we got to the point where we realized we were getting further from that date, and also we were expanding as a state organization. And so we changed the name to better reflect the actual agenda of the organization, and that's to have a positive impact against gun violence on a statewide level. For the first 7 years of our existence, we have had been primarily a gun control organization in the traditional sense. That is to say, almost everything we did was related to having an impact on policy and legislation, and we did a fair amount of lobbying. Last year, we reincorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We still lobby within the constraints of the tax regulations regarding 501c3s, and we certainly have an interest in policy issues. However, most of the work we do now is, I guess you could characterize it mostly as non-legislative in orientation. That is, we develop projects that do an end run around the more contentious issues of gun violence and gun control to instead build consensus and in community-based programs that can have a positive impact on the problem. Though we still do take controversial positions, controversial if you're on the other side of the fence.
Sure. The recent shootings at Columbine High School in Colorado has drawn the public's attention to this issue again in a fairly dramatic way. Very briefly describe, I've read a number of facts about suicides with handguns and the number of young people that are involved in accidental kinds of shootings and the like. Give us some sense of the scope of the problem that your organization sees.
Well, when you're talking about gun violence, okay, you're talking about a number of phenomena. If somebody dies as a result of a shooting in one of two ways, either they're murdered by somebody or they shoot themselves. Of course, there are accidental shootings as well, but statistically that is not nearly as significant as homicides and suicides. Nationally, homicides and suicides with firearms break just about even, okay? In Iowa, though, and this is what surprises a lot of people, and even a lot of people in the gun violence prevention movement. I've just attended a couple conferences in the last couple of weeks, and when I tell people from other states that in Iowa, suicide outnumbers homicide by a ratio of more than 5 to 1, they're stunned. That is the biggest problem we see here in Iowa, suicide. Mm-hmm. And a lot of our work is directed toward understanding the problem better and developing mechanisms for people to address the problem of suicide. Mm-hmm. Homicide certainly is a problem, but not in the same sense as it is elsewhere, especially in more urbanized areas. Homicide here is more correctly characterized as interpersonal between people who know each other, domestic shootings, for instance.
So as we talk about gun control, it's kind of a loaded term in a way, no pun intended, but it gets people's attention, and there's a lot of people that have firearms that use them to go deer hunting and turkey hunting and pheasant hunting and the like. What's your message to those folks? How do you talk about this in terms of gun control? Because that draws a lot of interest to this issue. I'm sure there's viewers paying some attention at this point about this discussion.
Well, our message to those folks is join us. We're not interested in taking away their guns. And as far as legitimate hunting weapons go, the only agenda we have is that people be responsible with them, that they take safety courses, hunter training courses. People may be surprised to hear it coming from my lips, but the National Rifle Association and other shooters organizations offer very good safety and hunter training courses, and people should take advantage of those things. They should especially focus on keeping their homes safe with their firearms. That's what we're interested in, especially keeping guns out of the reach of children. The shooting down in Conyers, Georgia, for instance, right after Littleton, involved a young man accessing his parents' hunting weapons. They were very poorly secured in a glass-fronted gun cabinet. The press reported it as the young man breaking into a gun cabinet, but he didn't have to. It was a very weak lock on it. He could have just broken, smashed the glass, and taken the weapons as well. So hunters and legitimate sportsmen really have nothing to fear from my organization. Well, nobody has anything to fear from us, really, because we represent, especially as regards policy issues and gun control, we represent the views of the overwhelming majority of Americans and Iowans.
Okay. Turning to the political side of this, we can kind of open the show saying that you had just returned from a trip to Washington, D.C.
Right.
About a couple weeks ago in the House, this is a New York Times story, gun control bill rejected in House on a bipartisan vote. And one of the issues focused on there were gun shows and trying to have background checks, waiting periods associated with gun shows. Before we talk about that, maybe it'd be helpful to show off some of the wares that you brought that are available at gun shows these days.
Exactly, thanks. And I will. People, if they may be wondering what we're doing with rather scary-looking ordnance like this, but I brought with me today 4 different weapons that we purchased at a gun show in Cedar Rapids at Hawkeye Downs. This is about, a little over 3.5 years ago. The number of people identified with my organization were well known and weren't welcome in the gun shows because we'd been there taking notes before, so we sent a straw buyer in, somebody who was fronting for us. We gave him about $1,500 in a shopping list to say, see if you can find these items. He could find these items in droves, things like this. This, for instance, is a Tech DC-9 handgun. In the confusion of the moment at Littleton, Colorado, a couple students came out and told reporters that somebody was in there with an Uzi, and this is what they were identifying, I'm sure. It is not an Uzi, and it is not as deadly as an Uzi. It's quite deadly enough, though. What makes it an assault-type weapon is it can accommodate a very large ammunition magazine. This particular clip can hold 32 rounds. It has also a heat suppressor on the barrel here, so instead of firing and with careful aim, you can hold it, basically shoot from the hip, and with gripping it with one hand and firing from the other, which is what the kids, by all reports, did in Columbine.
I'd like to note that these weapons have all been disabled.
Oh yes,
As
these.
you point 'em at me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We purchased these. The day after we purchased these, we took them to a professional gunsmith, and we asked him to permanently disable them. They're welded shut. The barrels, the magazines, nothing works.
What else do you have?
This is a very high quality handgun. It's a Glock 45 caliber pistol. It's the same type of weapon used increasingly by many police departments. And it has a very light trigger action, therefore making it dangerous to have in a household. If it's improperly stored, a small child as young as 2 or 3 years old, has enough strength with this trigger action to fire the weapon. This was sold to our buyer up at Hawkeye Downs with no questions asked, no ID required, no background check, no nothing. And that, of course, is what a lot of this legislation we're talking about in Washington a couple weeks was designed to prevent. Unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Another one.
This item here is a piece of junk, is what it is. It's a Saturday night special in common parlance. This was manufactured by a firm in California, one of the so-called Ring of Fire gun manufacturers that sprang up after the Gun Control Act of 1968 to manufacture domestically the cheap sorts of weapons that could no longer be legally imported. Hundreds of thousands of these are produced every year and just flooded, the market is flooded with them. You can pick this up at a gun show. I think we paid maybe $50 for it. It's a crime gun, and that's all it's good for. It's not good for self-defense because it's as likely as not to jam. Finally, what we have here is an AK-47. This weapon was, in its present form, was banned by the assault weapons ban in 1994. The manufacturer, which is a Chinese company, this particular model is a Chinese weapon, made some minor modifications, and the weapon is back on the market to get around the details of the assault weapon ban, which is often the case with gun manufacturers. You can buy this one at a gun show for, a few $100s is what we paid for it. You'll notice it takes a large capacity ammunition clip. It's a military weapon. When I was in the Army, I used the American equivalent, which is an M16. It's made to kill large numbers of people in a defensive or offensive capacity in short order. And that's what makes it a military weapon. It's not a weapon for self-defense, and it is not a hunting weapon unless the game you're hunting happens to be of the two-legged variety.
So Dennis, these kinds of weapons, I assume, are available at gun shows pretty much all the time. What was going on in Washington was a discussion about trying to make it a little bit more difficult for people to essentially do background checks and the like. What happened when you were in Washington vis-a-vis the House discussion? Things kind of fell apart there.
Well, I was there originally for a conference sponsored by Handgun Control, the national gun control organization. Unfortunately, most of the agenda was scuttled for the conference, or a significant portion of it, because they had no way of knowing when they scheduled the conference months ago that this vote would be coming up on the very days, the Thursday and Friday of the conference. I spent a good deal of my time on Thursday on the Hill speaking with members of the Iowa congressional delegation. The measures in question, most of them were related to gun shows. There were some other elements of the Senate version of the bill that related to the age of purchase, minimum age for purchasing handguns, and other aspects of the gun violence issue. But of primary interest at that time were the gun show amendments. And in a nutshell, what happened was that the National Rifle Association was not happy, understandably, given their historical perspective. They were not happy with imposing a 3-day waiting period, or excuse me, a 3 days, waiting period is not correct, maximum 3 days to do a background check, okay, in order to check out buyers. The fact of the matter is that 95% or greater buyers are just check out fine in less than an hour. 98% or more can check out fine in less than a day, which certainly falls within the parameters of gun shows, which most of which are held on the weekends. 1 to 2% might have a problem completing the so-called instant check within 24 hours for any number of reasons. Those are the 1 or 2% of people that we should be concerned about in the first place, that we need time to check out. significant numbers of those, if not most of them, would not check out and should not be buying weapons like this at gun shows. The bad guys know where to get these things. They know they can go into gun shows and they can buy things like this from so-called private dealers who currently don't even have to do an instant check. The Senate version called for a 72-hour period, time frame in which to do the checks. Representative John Dingell of Michigan, fronting for the NRA, reduced that to a 24-hour maximum time frame in which to do the check, knowing full well that that would not sail with the significant numbers of representatives who were in favor of the 72 hours. So in effect what happened was they managed to get a sufficient majority to pass that substitute the 24-hour period instead of the 72, knowing that that would kill the bill, and that's exactly what happened. On the following day, Friday, the bill went down in flames, the entire bill, including all the other elements of it from the Senate version.
Right. You're watching Iowa News and Views. We're at a little bit past halfway. The Iowans for the Prevention of Gun Violence have a website. We can give that to you now so you can check out their webpage if you're interested in these issues and want to get more information. I encourage you to go to their site and do that. Iowa News and Views also has its own website, and for our regular viewers, you know that, but if you're a new person, check it out. It gives you some information about the show. Also, we have an email address. If you have ideas for shows, guests, if you'd like to be a guest, send me some email and we'll see what we can do. We're visiting with Dennis Smith. He's Executive Director of the Iowans for the Prevention of Gun Violence. We're talking about gun control issues in our state. He's just talking a little bit about what happened in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago. One of the things that did pass, and briefly we could talk about this, is the issue of the 10 Commandments. Apparently members of Congress feel that we can stem the rising violence among young people by posting the 10 Commandments in our schools. What's your sense about that?
That's a red herring, of course. I believe, I'm a parent, I believe that it is a parent's responsibility to instill values in his or her children. And I've attempted to do that in raising my child. It is not the role of the schools to instill religious values, particularly. That we talk a lot about the Second Amendment. This is the First Amendment issues, and I think that the people who introduced that know full well that it will not sail and it will not stand up to constitutional scrutiny. They did it for political purposes, so they can go back to their constituents and say, "Look, we did something to address." The problem that's stemming from Littleton, the school shooting thing. There's an interesting symmetry, though, of course, as you know, because Moses himself, Charlton Heston, president of the NRA, well, he can just do his Cecil B. DeMille production and just put on the wig and the robes and go in there and hammer the thing to the schoolhouse wall, I suppose. That's another issue. We're not. All I can say is it's silliness, and I think most Americans
little to impact on that. Sure,
it'll do nothing.
So you've been involved in public policy questions. So you also have a project going that's called Iowa Thinking Cap. Is a way to kind of what can people in their communities do to raise awareness and provide for a safe environment for their kids. Tell us a little bit about that program.
Gladly. Iowa Thinking Cap, besides we have more than one program, but
Sure.
that is one of the most important programs that we're working on right now. Iowa Thinking Cap deals with the question of child access prevention, hence the CAP acronym there in the title. One of the greatest concerns coming out of the tragedy in Littleton and also the one in Conyers, Georgia, and for that matter all the school shootings, has to do with the issue of child access prevention. We have a law on the books in Iowa, as do 16 other states currently and counting, because they seem to be passing them right and left in state legislatures. We have a book though that, a law on the books that holds parents responsible if a child under the age of 14 gets a hold of that parent's firearm and harms himself or somebody else with that gun. Unfortunately, in the past 10 years since that law has been on the books in Iowa, we're not aware of one instance in which a county attorney has actually taken that law and used it. It doesn't send a parent up the river for life. It's a minor misdemeanor involving a nominal fine. I believe it's up to $1,500 and up to a year in jail. Of course, even if it were applied, we would never expect parents to do a hard time for such a tragedy, but prosecutors aren't willing even to fine somebody, a mere slap on the wrist. And therefore, the law really has no deterrent effect. It doesn't serve its function in order to educate people. Therefore, we have decided to basically do an end run around the law, or its the lack of enforcement of that law, rather, and appeal to parents directly to take more responsibility for their kids. We foresee we're developing a coalition with various partners in law enforcement, education, and medicine, and have already taken on as partners a couple local law enforcement agencies and medical organizations. And we will be going into the schools and talking not to the kids, but to parents, whether at church forums, school forums, PTAs, things like that. We will discuss the issue with them. We'll try to raise consciousness on this, so to speak, but we're not going to stop at that. The biggest problem in child access prevention that we've found is the unwillingness or the lack of willingness of parents to discuss this with each other. Simply put, people aren't comfortable asking other people about their firearm ownership habits or their firearm safety habits, and therefore they never ask the question at all.
So if my son or daughter is going to play at your house,
at my house, exactly,
you're suggesting that we ought to have a conversation so I know that you're on top of making sure those guns are secured.
If it's a concern for you, okay? But people don't do that. Sure. They're not comfortable because the issue of firearms in America is such a volatile issue. Right. So therefore, we're looking at instituting a way around that problem, a mechanism, if you will, for parents to use us, our organization, and our project as a sort of middleman in that. And that is the establishment of online databases of people who enroll their homes as what we call a safe house, the Safe House Project. By enrolling your home as a safe house, you do not reveal whether or not you have firearms. That's not the point. By enrolling as a safe house, all you're saying is, if I do have firearms in this house, they are not available to my children, especially my smaller children. Our project will establish a set of criteria in consultation with the law enforcement agencies and the Department of Public Safety as to what safe storage criteria are for children at various levels. Therefore, parents can simply access the database if it's a problem for them. If the home in question is not on the database, then they have a decision to make. But at least this will give them a point of departure for discussing this with other parents. For parents who don't have easy access to a computer, we also propose to establish a telephonic automated system where they can enter the phone number, for instance, of the home their child is visiting, and to see if there's a record, if that person is a Safe House enrollee. It does not involve privacy issues at all, sure. and totally avoids the question of making value judgments on gun ownership.
Dennis, we're down to the last couple minutes here. What's your advice for people that are interested in getting involved in this issue?
Well, to get involved in the first place, okay? I know that sounds a bit redundant to what you just said, but organizations such as mine can work effectively only insofar as we have the support of a broad base of people. Everybody we talk to, virtually everybody we talk to, agrees with the work we're doing, agrees with the positions we take on legislative issues, and are happy to hear that we're working on other approaches besides legislation. But in order to keep doing that, we need local support. There are a number of sources where we get funds from outside of Iowa, but what's most important, and to keep the money flowing from outside of Iowa, we need support from inside Iowa. You've given our website, our email address, our phone. Call us, write us, join us, work with us. Give us the benefit of your views, your advice, and together we can make a big difference on this issue, both in Iowa and the country.
Very good. Dennis, thanks for being with us. Dennis Smith, the Executive Director of Iowans for the Prevention of Gun Violence, an organization trying to raise all our awarenesses about the problems associated with gun violence in our state as we look at this as, frankly, a public health issue of great concern to a lot of folks. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. We appreciate you joining us. I'd like to thank our contributors, our local sponsors around the state, and of course our crew who's here tonight doing all the hard work to make sure we get a show out so you can see what we're up to. We'll be on same time next week, same channel. Hope you join us. This has been Iowa News and Views. So long.